Saturday, Armageddon. My name is Sam Richardson. I am the curator of the Canadian Tank Museum. How are we all doing today? Excellent. Are we ready for the world to end or what? No, luckily that didn't happen and it's not going to happen today. But we are very excited to bring you our season finale show where we're going to show you some examples of the fighting vehicles that would have taken the field of battle had we come that close to the world actually ending. And speaking as someone who's, in my particular case, I'm 30 years old, born in 1995, just after the Cold War ended. I don't have any live memory of it by any means. But who here does? Live memory of the Cold War, yes. And do we have any Cold War veterans in the audience? Meaning anyone who served in any armed forces during the Cold War period at any point? Do we have any in our audience? Oh, I see a few there. Well, excellent. Yes, some of them are being modest. Yes, and on the subject of that modesty, I feel it's important to point out, going into this show, that we think of the, shall we say, the hard-fought battlefield moments, like in the Second World War, most recently in Afghanistan, where there were Canadian troops under immediate direct fire from a tangible enemy, and there was a battle to win on the ground. And sadly, I think our Cold War veterans miss out on some of that recognition that those other veterans have received from our community, because perhaps luckily for them, they didn't have to be deployed to a battle zone. But the fact is that no matter when or where, whether they were in Canada, in West Germany, or on a peacekeeping mission to one of a number of places, such as Egypt, Cyprus, and later on Somalia, and the former Yugoslav republics, they were ready. They were there and prepared to make that commitment that could have and might have involved the ultimate sacrifice if necessary. So this show is certainly dedicated to them. We'd love to thank them for their commitment and their service to our nation. And what we'll do now is we'll ask you to please stand as you are able for our national anthem, and then we'll do a round of 3 cheers in the classic hip hip hooray fashion for our Cold War veterans. That sound good? All right. National anthem. Let's have 3 cheers for our Cold War veterans. Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Hip hip! Hooray! Thank you very much. Now, perhaps if you've been to see us before, which how many of you have, by the way, who's been to Saturday before? Excellent. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Those of you who may know of us, we like to make a bit of an entrance, and there's nothing that helps us do that like architecture, and the Sandcat has been used worldwide as a security, police escort, and armored convoy escort vehicle. You can see up top it can be equipped with a machine gun or any other manner of small arms. But it's time for me to hand it over now to our museum president. Please welcome Alan Duffy.
Well, welcome to the Canadian Tank Museum. This is our very last show. You've probably heard that. It's also known as our best show. So you're very fortunate to be here for that. It's also known as the heaviest. We got more armor out on this than any other tank Saturday. Except for the finale. How many of you have been here before? Put your hands up. Oh, well, we must be doing something right if you're coming back. Are you guys ready to see some cool tank stuff? All right, good. Well, the Canadian Tank Museum, we've been around a fair bit. We used to be known as the Ontario Regiment Museum, and that's still here. Those of you that went through the static area, we honor the service and sacrifice of our veterans there. And I would like to say one thing here, and that is that we do not honor war. We don't honor war. We want to see all conflict come to an end. What we're here to do is to honor the service and sacrifice of our veterans. Do we have veterans in here now? Okay, well, let's hear it for all the veterans, because this is what we're here honoring. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. We would not be successful. We have 4 full-time people, that's it. We have over 200 volunteers. If you guys like what you see, if you want to be part of our band of brothers and sisters, we have a recruiting booth in there that'd be welcome to talk to you about it. We don't pay well. Well, we don't pay. We're volunteer. But we have a lot of fun, and it's quite an amazing group of people. So I would like to turn this over to our executive director. And just before that, 200 volunteers. We couldn't do it without them. Can I have a round of applause for our volunteers? Great. Thank you so much for supporting the Canadian Tank Museum. And at this point, I'd like to introduce you to Jeremy Blowers. He's our executive director, and he'll be the MC for the balance of this show.
Thanks, Al. Let's hear it for Al Duffy, our museum president. Again, my name is Jeremy Blowers. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Tank Museum. Welcome to our finale show. I'm sure our curator Sam told you a little bit about the Oshkosh Sandcat. Just an inside joke. The Executive Director and the President coming out to the tank arena. We call it our Armored Executive Limo. Alright, it's a good way to make an entrance. Let the Sandcat clear the field. Tank Saturday Armageddon. What is it all about? It's about the Cold War. And if you were around, you can remember, before 1990, the world was living constantly under the fear of a third world war. After the horror of the First World War, what seemed like the finality of the Second World War, where we would finally live in peace, another war was brewing between East and West, between different ideologies. And it actually spurred an arms race like the world had never seen. We were worried about a small conflict breaking out into a massive conflict, and then as our technology advanced, even a nuclear conflict. That's why we call it Armageddon. It could have led to Armageddon and the destruction of not only our civilization, but maybe even our planet. So today you're going to see some of the biggest, some of the most dangerous vehicles, and learn a little bit about their development and why they were developed after the Second World War. And just a comment, because we're living in strange times, it's 2025. And as a historian, it seems incredible after we've been through all that to see the world possibly slowly going into 2 different camps once again. And maybe a new arms race is on the horizon. So it's very important that we remember our history, remember what we've been through, and what almost happened from 1946 to 1990, when the entire world could have been engulfed in a nuclear conflict. So that's the education part of it. You are going to feel the ground rumble. It is going to be loud. And we're going to take you through over 30 years of armored development. Are you ready to hear the tanks roll? Marshal, Marshal, roll out the tanks. combat forces the development of 4 different nations today. And the first one is the Soviet Union. So after the Second World War, the Soviet Union was devastated. They had some of the highest casualties of any of the combatants other than China during that horrible conflict from 1939 to 1945. And they had grabbed a huge portion of Europe and Asia, including from Manchuria all the way to the middle of Germany, and were absorbing that into the Eastern Bloc. They were installing governments and reneging on agreements that were made during the Second World War to give those nations independence. So really the world was being pushed into 2 camps. Now the Soviet Union was such a massive army after the Second World War, they didn't disarm. Here in the West, we started to disarm, send the troops home, but the Soviet Union continued to build and advance their technology. So let's have a look at some of these vehicles that sparked the Cold War. Marshall, send down the Soviets. Infantry Fighting Vehicle, IFV. Now in the West, and you'll see, and we started developing these in the Second World War, APCs, or Armored Personnel Carriers. But by the early 1960s, the West was really being shocked not only by the technology that had been coming out of the Soviet Union, they had been utilizing all of the lessons learned from the Second World War to develop faster, more capable, and more dangerous vehicles on the battlefield. So they just didn't develop an APC that moved troops around. They developed the BMP-1, which is an infantry fighting vehicle. It serves the purpose of an APC. You might have been lucky enough to ride in an M113 armored personnel carrier earlier before the show. But the Soviets, this vehicle, they took two concepts and put it into one. That of an armored personnel carrier and that of a light tank. So in the back, you have space for 8 soldiers. So this can deploy 8 troops onto the battlefield and quickly move them in and out, following behind the tanks. Also, all those soldiers have situational awareness, something the M113 doesn't have. And those of you who may have served in the M113 know what it's like bouncing around in the back of that metal box, where each of these soldiers, you can see they have a vision for it. They can see where the vehicle is going and what was the situation outside the vehicle. They also had a little armored door they could open. They could put their rifles or some machine guns through, and they could fire from the safety of inside the vehicle. The vehicle was equipped with a turret that could turn 360 degrees and could fire on other armored vehicles or light tanks. And to deal with big tanks, that rail you see above the main gun there, that mounts a Sauger missile. That is an anti-tank missile. So here we have an armored personnel carrier that protects the troops well, gives the troops inside situational awareness, can fight other vehicles, and can even take out tanks. And the Soviet Union in the early 1960s started producing these not only in the Soviet Union, but in Czechoslovakia and in Poland, mass producing them. It really started to raise alarm. It is also amphibious. This vehicle can cross streams and small rivers, and it propels itself through the water using its tracks. So it's an incredible design for this time, 1963, and even today, in the BMP-2 and then later variants. Sadly, because of what's going on in Eastern Europe, you can still see the BMP-1 in a combat zone here in 2025, even though it's a Cold War vehicle. The back of the vehicle, some more like ingenious things that they built into it. These massive doors, that's not all armor, that's the fuel tanks of the vehicle. And it doesn't seem very dangerous unless you're running away from the enemy, I guess, right? So your fuel tanks are on the rear of the vehicle. Now, we talk about Armageddon. In the 1960s, the Soviets were definitely preparing for such an eventuality, because these vehicles also had a special system called an MBC, in English, nuclear, biological, and chemical defense systems, which means that this vehicle has filters on it, and it can be sealed, and in the area of a nuclear blast, it can continue to fight. Think about how terrifying that is. Moving to a city after a nuclear war, and the soldiers inside can still fight. They're not completely taken out. So that is the BMP-1. And the next vehicle, the Soviet tank, that was the revolutionary vehicle that set off the entire arms race. But we'll start here with the BMP, just showing you how advanced that Soviet technology was, and in some ways, it was ahead of our Western technology in its ideas and in its implementations. So we have Rich Bennett here. He is the vehicle section director, a volunteer at the museum. And he worked very hard to get this vehicle back up and running. Believe it or not, it was broken down in the shop for about 2 years. So let's hear it for Rich and the BMP crew. Very fast, very nimble, maneuverable. And again, you can imagine that they were building so many of these, and they came up against main battle tank. Believe it or not, again, T-54, T-55 tanks like this, you might see them in the news. They are currently fighting in the Ukraine. The tank, its design and layout, was actually developed in 1905. So by the end of the Second World War, they had taken all of those lessons in armored warfare and tank design, from their own developments, from seeing what the Americans, the British were doing, to seeing what the Germans, their opponents, were doing, and they developed this tank in 1945. They didn't really start production until 1950 and 1951, and just like the BMP, they started building it everywhere. Czechoslovakia, Poland, different places in the Soviet Union. They produced so many of these that it was raising those alarm bells in the West. There is no other tank in the world that was more produced than the T-54-55. I'll just give you a number. It's estimated that about 110,000 of these tanks were produced. And that's why, so many years later, we're still seeing them in conflicts all around the world. And in that global conflict between East and West, they were exporting these tanks to all their Soviet satellite states. So the West was up against this. Now, when we first see this, we see it in 1956. We talked about spreading over Europe. You might have heard of the Iron Curtain. Well, apparently some of the Hungarians didn't like the fact that there was a government installed in Hungary. And there was a revolution in 1956. And some of the revolutionaries actually were able to fight back. The Soviets deployed tanks in the streets of Budapest. And the revolutionaries actually captured a T-54, and they drove it into the British embassy. And for the very short time it was there, the British studied it. They took measurements of its gun, its armor, and what they found, they were shocked, is that this was a tank killer that could destroy any Allied main battle tank. It had thicker armor than any Allied main battle tank. It has a 100-millimeter gun. The Allies at the time, the British and our Centurions, were using 20-pounders, so it's about an 85-millimeter weapon. The Americans had everything between the M46, M47, M48 series of their tanks at this time, anything from an 80-millimeter to a 100-millimeter. So the Soviet tank had more firepower. It also had incredible sloped armor. And the front mantlet here of the turret casting was over 200 millimeters thick. And none of those Allied weapons could hope to penetrate this tank. So it was shocking. And they're mass producing these. And this sparked, from 1956, an arms race on building tanks and armored vehicles. And in that period, you'll see so many different ideas come out and so many things that were built to counter this Soviet design and technology, the T-54. Now, not only does it have its main weapon, the T-54 has a little hole here in the armor, and that allows the driver to fire a machine gun that sprays the front of the tank. Terrifying, right, the infantry? On top there, you see the crew commander and the Dishka machine gun. And a Dishka, just like a R-50 caliber machine gun, it's basically a cannon. That thing can fire through cinder block walls. It can take out other vehicles. It can take out positions. So, very, very powerful vehicle. In this variant here, you can see also on the back that they have extra drums of diesel to give this extra range. And not only was this more advanced than our tanks, but because they were producing so many of them, there would have been like 8 of these for every American, British, or Canadian tank at the time, and that was terrifying. So here, the driver today, we have Chris Bennett. He's the maintenance coordinator here, also a volunteer, and he's responsible for keeping all of these vehicles running and working with the volunteers to get it done. So let's hear it for Chris, the T-54, and their crew. So the Americans, who dominated in wartime production in the Second World War, were now playing catch-up. And, the half-tracks and other personnel carriers of the 40s were no longer going to do. Now, they came up with this vehicle. There are several variants before this, but it was also kind of rushed to production. Cold War, there was many small wars happening around the globe. And instead of the NATO and the Soviet Union, thank goodness, duking it out, sometimes they had things called proxy wars, where they would be trying to install their ideology or their government in another country somewhere in the world. It could be Southeast Asia, it could be Africa, South America. And at this time, in the early 1960s, when the BMP-1 was being developed, the Americans were rushing stuff for fighting in the Vietnam War. And so this came out in 1960. This is an M113 Armored Personnel Carrier, or again, APC. And after the show, you can actually buy a ticket in the gift shop to get a ride in one of these, maybe even this one. So it was rushed into production. They had to produce a massive amount of them. Again, they could possibly have come up with something better. But once they had the design, they had to go. They were involved in conflicts, and the Soviets were gaining that advantage in armor and in main battle tanks. So we ended up with the M113, first deployed to the Vietnam War, and this is incredible. These vehicles are still in service to this day. The M113 is the most common Western armored vehicle. Just as we're talking about that T-54 with over 110,000 made, they're all over the world in Russian and Ukrainian hands. The 113 is still used, a variant, is still used by the Canadian Armed Forces. 113s make up over 30% of all current 2025 United States armored vehicles. And you can see we've donated a lot of these to Ukraine. So it's meant for, it's not a tank, it's meant for moving troops in and out of the battlefield. Unlike the BMP, it has to have a rear door, but it actually has a ramp. The ramp can drop down, so it can quickly deploy those troops or quickly allow those troops to get back into the vehicle. It's also mildly amphibious. It can go, it can ford rivers and float just slightly, not as fast as the BMP. Its main armament, and there's many different variants. This one here has a 50 caliber machine gun with a shield for the commander. But then again, think about that BMP. To operate that 50 cal, that commander has to expose themselves outside of the armor of the vehicle, whereas those of the VFP can fight within the hull of the vehicle. So it can carry, again, it's a tight fit, but up to 8 infantry in the back, has a crew commander, and has a driver. So these are produced, mass produced, and then sold to all Western nations, including Canada. So let's hear it for the M113 team. The American main battle tank, and that's what he's doing up there. It's called Overwatch. So here's this Armour going ahead, and the main battle tank is sitting there scoping, looking for Soviet vehicles. Again, in a rush, the Americans developed, by 1950, this massive, massive machine. So by Chrysler, it is the M60 main battle tank. They were rushing to catch up. After they saw that T-55, again, the guns on their current tanks were not big enough, the arm was thick enough, the vehicle was not fast enough. So by 1960, that was 1956, this was supposed to be a stopgap tank. But it ended up being one of the longest serving main battle tanks of the US arsenal. It is massive, at almost 50 tons. It is way, thank you very much, Brendan, for not knocking me with your gun, because he's paying attention. It has, we were looking at that Armour, right? It has a British L7, so again, the Allies are all working together and sharing technology, 105 millimeter main weapon. So this British Royal Ordnance L7 gun, and then the American licensed copies of it, became the standard weapon for all Allied tanks after we saw that T-55. And surprisingly, it's still used on battlefields to this day. So even though it's an American tank, it has a British designed gun. And you'll see that also on the German tanks, like when we get to the Leopard, etc. So with a 105 millimeter main weapon, it can penetrate that armor of the T-55 and other variants. However, because there's so many Soviet tanks being built, the Western Allies realized that they had to make their tanks bigger and heavier. Because if this M60 was to go out onto the plains of Germany, each M60 would probably, again, I told you, come up against 8 enemy tanks. So the Americans, and their philosophy of tank design, went for bigger, for heavier, for more armor. Look at the front sloping glacis plate of this main battle tank. We're talking about that millimeters of thickness. Okay, so slope, this is almost 300 millimeters of thickness and more in some other places. So a main hit from the 100 millimeter gun is not going to penetrate the front of this tank. Other interesting innovations. In the above there you see the crew commander. He's also in his own little cupola, which is a mini turret, and he has a 50 caliber machine gun. To turn it for you, Brendan. So it gives the commander also that extra flexibility of using that weapon to suppress troops or keep enemy troops away from the tank. Now, tanks also have something called a coaxial machine gun. Now, what is that? You'll see this in all the tanks that pull out today. There's a machine gun that's in that mantlet there, and wherever you point the main gun is also pointing a machine gun. And that is operated by the gunner who is deep down in the belly of the tank. So the gunner can decide, or be commanded to, either fire its main weapon or just pepper a soft target or a soft skin vehicle with that machine gun. So very heavily armed, very heavy, and these served until 1991 with the US forces. The last time they were deployed, it was in the 1991 Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded their neighbor, Kuwait. and the Americans sent there. The U.S. Marine Corps was still using the M60, even though the main armored force of the U.S. Army had moved to the M1 Abrams. So as a stopgap tank that was just supposed to be developed and used in a short period of time until we developed something better, it ended up serving for over 30 years. So we have Ashley here as the driver. That's right, there are female tank drivers. And we have Brendan up top as the commander. They are a regular crew for the M60. Let's hear it for them in the M60. For a massive tank, it's actually incredibly fast. Not the fastest tank of the Cold War with platoon speed, but much faster than that T-54 and T-55. Now the British. The British have been developing tanks since the First World War, and they weren't going to buy American equipment. I'll show you what they developed. So again, if you think about the history of the tank, the British were the first to actually develop and field a tank. And yes, France was not too far behind them. And believe it or not, the Italians were actually pretty close in the First World War with armored vehicles and a tank. So they have a proud history of developing armored vehicles, and they have a good industrial base for this kind of development. So what the Soviet Union is building all this stuff and giving it or selling it to their client states, the United States is doing that as well. And other players, as we'll see, start getting in the game. But the British were not going to buy someone else's equipment. They wanted to develop their own. So what we're looking at here, it might be very similar to that American M113 you saw. This is a British FV, or fighting vehicle, series 432. So FV 432. Now, it's very similar to the M113. The M113 is made out of an alloy of aluminum, steel, where this is made out of just straight steel. The British, of course, have different design elements. Some people love it, some people hate it, and again, it was long-serving. What are some of the things that people really hated about the FV432, if there's any British veterans here that have served in it? Where the 113 hatch opened behind the driver, Notice that the 432 hatch is open beside the driver's head. Now, without listening to his crew commander, you might find it kind of ridiculous that he can't actually see what is to his left. But yet, the British continued with this design. They didn't put a ramp on the back of the vehicle. They put a huge metal door. And in later models, they actually had to put a safety light on the door because Armour is very heavy. And there was a lot of injuries of British troops in training with that huge metal door. So they actually had to develop where the commander had to push a button that it was safe to open the door or close the door. You can imagine that if you catch a finger or a toe in an armored door, it's not just a bruise or a boo-boo. We call it a tank bite. You could lose that digit. So here we have actually two brothers that are volunteers at the museum, and they're both recently retired from the Ontario Regiment, our local armored regiment. We have brothers Nigel and Ian Lawrence, who are looking after the 432. Let's hear it for the brothers Lawrence. Just before I let the 432 go, you see a lot of these on the front of vehicles. Okay? And now when the inner tanks go around, you can look for them. Those are smoke dischargers. So that allows a vehicle to create a cloud of smoke around it. Imagine this 432 comes over a hill and there's a Soviet T-55. He obviously can't fight that vehicle. So to get away safely, armored vehicles can deploy smoke grenades and to create some smoke around the vehicle. All right, 432 team, off you go. The next vehicle is incredibly loud. You can see it there up on the overwatch position, proudly flying the Union Jack. This vehicle was definitely the pride of the UK military for several decades. It replaced the Centurion. Again, the Centurion was a fantastic tank, and it continued service for many, many decades. But the British, again, were not going to produce the number of tanks that the Soviet states were producing. Their philosophy was to create one that was so heavy, so big, and so powerful that it could almost be a fortress to stand up against a wave of Soviet army. And this is the Chieftain main battle tank. This is a later variant, Mark 11. Both the Centurion and the Chieftain have been upgraded many times. So, what's different about the Chieftain? They weren't going to go with the L705mm main weapon. The one they designed, they decided to go even further. And they developed a 120mm main cannon on the Chieftain. At the time, in the early 1960s, everything about the Chieftain was top secret. The size of the gun, the thickness of the armor. It also had those NBC or nuclear, biological, and chemical systems so that the crew inside could continue to fight even if there was a nuclear apocalypse. Other advances they made on the Chieftain. This ridiculously thick frontal armor. Unlike the American tank, where you sit in the tank, this armor is so thick and it is so sloped that the driver has to lie down to drive the vehicle. Is in a sling, so that they're encased in that huge frontal armor. Now, the Chieftain served for many, many years, and this was the vehicle that scared the Soviets back. Now, in the Museum Military Vehicle Conservation Center, you'll see another Chieftain, and it's painted in a really strange pattern. It's not green, it's not tan. That's urban camouflage. And that Chieftain was deployed to Berlin behind the Iron Curtain during the Cold War. And it's in that camouflage pattern because it didn't have a forest to hide in. It had to hide amongst buildings and in parking lots and in a factory. So the British developed that urban camouflage, and I really encourage you to go check that out, because that particular vehicle actually did serve for the British forces in Berlin during the Cold War. Now there's something else top secret about the Chieftain. Apparently the engine wasn't very good. It was so heavy that the Leyland multi-fuel engine, they had this idea that they could make an engine that with a few changes could use either gasoline, or for the Brits petrol, or diesel. And they released the tank before all those teething problems were out. And it was notorious amongst the Allied tankers, and especially the British tankers, that they couldn't rely on the Chieftain. And that even though it was terrifying the Soviets, you know, if it breaks down, it's a sitting fortress. Like, good luck trying to penetrate that armor or reach it with its massive 120 millimeter long gun. But that was an unfortunate secret of that early part of the Cold War. In this Mark 11, they since have fixed that and became one of the better British tanks. Now, the 120 millimeter gun, this gun they kept. So even when they retired the Chieftain in the 1990s and went to the Challenger 1, they kept that gun. And this gun type still holds the world record for the longest tank-on-tank kill, which happened in the 1991 Gulf War, where a British tank destroyed an Iraqi T-55 at 3.5, I believe it was 3.5 kilometers away. So imagine that, 3.5 kilometers away. Imagine there's a Soviet tank up there on the ridge that you can barely see, and this thing can take it out. So we have a long time volunteer here operating the Chieftain. We have Peter Cocker, who's been a member here for well over a decade, and he's a retired Canadian Armed Forces veteran as well, of the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment. So let's hear it for Pete and the Mark 11 Chieftain team. What an incredibly loud engine. You guys can roll. Now, Canada has produced tanks. We produced tanks in the Second World War. If you're really into tanks, you might know about the Ram 1, 2, and the British Sherman tank, and lots of other incredible military vehicles. Well, let's see what we were doing with technology during the Cold War period. The Canadians. obviously we have a large industrial base that we did in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. But in this Cold War, we looked a lot to our allies to buy equipment, and we sold them our equipment. When it came to armored vehicles, Canada looked to other NATO countries within our budget as a medium power, and one of the vehicles that Canada produced and used exclusively, again, is the American-built M113. Canada also purchased tanks, but would never be able to purchase the tanks in a number that some of the other nations like the United States or Great Britain or France could. So they came up with some really interesting options to give their vehicles greater lethality and a deterrent on the battlefield. And one of those, and the M113 series of vehicles is incredible in how there's so many variants and what people do with them. So the Canadians and the Americans, they had a different version. We developed what's called the M113 TUA, or Tow Under Armour. So you basically have that armored personnel carrier, but it has this massive missile launcher on the top of it, and is designed for destroying main battle tanks. So regardless how many Soviet tanks you come up against, and how many tanks you have, if you have other vehicles that also have anti-tank capability, then that sort of levels the playing field on the possible battlefield of World War III. So this was a wire-guided missile. And we see those wire-guided missiles coming back now due to drones, but that's a different story for a different tank day. So the operators would load these two missiles, and again, if there was a Soviet tank up on that ridge, they could fire that missile that has a very long string. It's wire-guided. And from inside the vehicle, they are guiding that missile through the air to hit the enemy tank. So it's giving a fairly innocuous vehicle like the M113 that power to fight or get into the fight with vehicles like the T-54, T-62, and T-72 that came after them. Canada used these not just during the Cold War, but they used them into peacekeeping and other NATO deployments. There's one famous story when the Canadians were in former Yugoslavia, and they brought the Serbian commander to their base, and they showed the Serbian commander how one of these 113s, the TUA, they had a burnt out tank on a ridge, and they fired and they showed how it could destroy a tank. It wasn't to impress him, it was to give them a deterrent, saying, we're here, we have the capability, let's not fight. And we all know what peacekeeping is all about. So, here we have John Panethere as the driver, and we have Izzy Roberts as the crew commander. Now John, he lives in Canada now, he's an expat, but he is a veteran of the United States Army, and he's been helping us look after some of our American equipment now that he's moved to Canada. So let's hear it for John and the TUA team, now representing Canada. Western NATO ally, and it's shocking who it was. It was Germany. West Germany. Germany was divided into two during the Cold War, East Germany and West. And the Western Germans, who were the enemies of the Second World War, they had continued to develop tanks. And everybody knows about German tanks and their development. So just like the T-54, The Germans had taken all the lessons from the Second World War and they were going to put it into a new tank, a new 20th century marvel known as the Leopard tank. And that's what Canada purchased in between 1977 and 1979. We purchased these. So the Leopard tank, developed by Western Germany, again, think about German tank names. You know about the Tiger and the Panther and the Puma. So again, it's a cat name, it's the Leopard. Now the Leopard tank, purchased by Canada, is a great relationship, and it turned into an economic relationship between Germany and Canada since we purchased these tanks. We now know that our modern Canadian Armed Forces uses the Leopard 2 tank, because that relationship continues. So the Germans figured that no matter how big your tank is, how thick your armor is, how expensive it is, the tank that strikes first is the tank that wins. You need speed, you need accuracy. So the Germans, when they developed their tank, unlike the American M60, which is massive and heavy, definitely not like the British Chieftain, they decided to build a tank that was around 40 tons. That was well armored, but not as thickly armored as them, because they figured he who shoots first wins the battle. So they put all of their attention into the speed of the tank, the maneuverability of the tank. The Leopard 1 main battle tank is still considered the fastest and most maneuverable tank that was created in the 20th century. And Canada had these, and we had these tanks and our 113s, all the other vehicles, we had these in Western Germany during the Cold War as a deterrent against the Soviet invasion. And actually the driver of this Leopard, and this is a Leopard C1, so Canadian Leopard 1. We have Osborne here. Now, he loved this tank, and you can see he proudly has the flag of the Hussars up above his tank because he served in that regiment in these tanks in Germany in the 1980s. So let's hear it for Oz. And let's have Oz just also show some of the crazy maneuverability of the Leopard C1. Let's hit it for the Leopard 1 again, guys. Come on. So Canada was in this war, and we were in it to win it. And we bought equipment from our allies. Now, before I let the Leopard go, because we're going to get to a parade segment again, now that you know more about these vehicles, we're going to do another vehicle parade with all of them, so you can hear them, smell them, and see them. And then we're coming back, we have the finale of our show. We're going to have a simulated tank battle. 2 tanks, 2 crews, one-on-one, duking it out here in the tank arena. Does that sound like something you guys are interested in? Okay. When the Leopard goes by, the engine, once again, it's all about speed. And it is a fast tank. The engine is actually so powerful that if you're close enough to it, even if you're there in the bleachers, you might feel your chest rumble. That's because the Leopard engine is actually shaking the air around the tank. It's such a powerful, powerful machine. All right, Canadians, roll out. This is your opportunity, once again, to see all these vehicles. Now, after the show, after the finale, Battle Royale, all these vehicles are going to park down in the tank harbor. And once they're all safely parked, they will open that gate, and you can get up close to these vehicles, you can touch them, have a look inside, meet the crews, meet the veterans, and they can give you a lot of detail about their service, or more specific detail than we give in the general presentation. And we'll do the closing parade of the Cold War tanks of Armageddon. Marshal, roll out the tanks. All right, ladies and gentlemen, how's Tank Saturday been so far? Definitely not something you see every day. Now, the vehicles of the show, they're getting put down into the tank harbor there. Again, after the show, you'll be able to go and visit them, meet the crews. We're just preparing for our finale. So, it's been about an hour show so far. If you really need to use the washroom or something, we're going to have about 5 minutes. We're going to have a very short break, use the washroom, etc. Because the two tanks that are going to fight it out, they're being bombed up right now. What is that? They're being loaded with their pyrotechnics. Okay? We don't drive tanks around here in front of you with live pyrotechnics, that are set to go. So we wait until the finale to load them up. So about 5 minutes. And then I'll see you here for a simulated battle we call Battle Royale. Now, one thing that's interesting, you're going to see the tanks move, how the crews track each other, how they use the features of the tank arena to protect the weaker part of their tanks. But you guys are going to decide who wins Battle Royale. How are we going to do that? You're not going to vote for your favorite tank. You're going to vote for the crew that you believe best use the strengths of their tank and the weaknesses of the enemy tank to come out on top in Battle Royale. So it goes to you guys, and this is a pride on the line here for our crews, because this is our finale show. This is the crown of 2025 Battle Royale. So they'll be duking it out here in the tank arena in about 5 minutes. So let's, once again, if you need to take that break, I will see you here. Thank you. Now, this is going to be a loud one. Okay, so I'm going to have my hearing protection on. And I'm not going to be standing in the tank arena, because again, these crews are highly trained, but this is not choreographed. They are actually trying to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outfight the enemy tank. You'll notice that the drivers don't have their heads up. The drivers are sitting in the tank with the hatch closed, and they're looking through their vision ports. Their crew commander on their radio is giving them advice as to how to move and where it's safe to move. So that being said, I'm not going to be standing here in the tank arena. I'm going to be safely behind the barrier. Now, I'm going to call out what I see from my point of view on how each tank performs when they get a good move, a good shot. But it will ultimately come back to you. We're going to bring them out here, introduce the two tanks, they'll do the battle, and then they'll return for you guys to vote who wins 2025 Battle Royale. Marshall, send out the tanks. So, here, we already know a bit about this tank. This is the American-built M60A3 main battle tank. Its strength is not speed. Its strength is its armor. Any shot by the enemy tank in this front glacis plate would probably not penetrate and hurt the crew inside. Here, we talk about the Leopard tank. This is a Belgian Army Leopard. Again, NATO countries bought from each other. So this is a Leopard 1A5, formerly in service with the Belgian Army. Again, its strength will be its speed and maneuverability. The front glacis plate probably could take a hit, but not guaranteed. But any shot the M60 gets on the side of the vehicle or on the engine deck would probably be a penetrating kill shot to that tank. They're both equally armed with that L7 British Ordnance 105mm main weapon, because they're both NATO tanks. So it's going to be fast, it's going to be loud, and I will see you here as we decide who wins the battle. M60 crew, are you ready? Leopard crew, are you ready? Leopard crew? This is why we have radio control tanks.
Yeah, is that what you're doing?
Leopard crew, are you ready?
There. That makes sense.
All right, guests, are you ready? Tankers, take your firing position. The M60 is already behind the cover of that route Leopard has put their front line on the enemy. I got a quick shot. I'm going to be a little bit because I'm a moving target. M60 now is using the hill. It's from the line facing the enemy. Oh, another shot on the M60 plus and a return shot by the M60. M60 is not going to wait around for that Leopard. They know that they have the speed advantage. Good shot by the M60 on the rear deck of the Leopard. Leo trying to fire.
Into the run at high speed. I mean, there's a bridge.
Oh, really? Nice.
There by the driver of the Leopard. And the gun is tracking the Leo, but their side is exposed. Great shot and a turn shot. That Leopard shot may have penetrated the side armor of that M60. Well done by both teams. It's going to come down to what you guys think. I saw some great hits there by both tanks. So definitely using its speed, trying to flush out the M60 when it was in a good position with its armor forward. M62 I thought was doing a great job of actually tracking the enemy. But it will be up to you. Let's get the crews out of the tanks and have a look at them. Excuse me. Oh, tank up here, right? Okay, so So here we have McMillan, and we also have King. They are both Canadian Armed Forces veterans, and we're operating this vehicle. Let's just hear it for them. They did a great job. And here we again, we have Brendan and Ashley, and Chris is the loader up there. So let's hear it for the M60 crew. They did a fantastic job. Trust me, this isn't easy. So, this is how it works. And this big stakes for these crews. Okay, they are all friends, they all work together, but there's a bit of a rivalry. We won't be voting for what is your favorite tank. You will be voting on which tank crew you believe outfought, outperformed, and outsmarted their enemy and exploited the weaknesses of their tank. So, by applause, hollering and shouting and clapping, who believes the M60 crew won? That's not bad, not bad. Who believes, by applause and shouts and hoots, believes it was the Leopard crew that won? So, sorry M60 crew, you had a lot of wins this season, but we're going to have to give it. Battle Royale 2025 title goes to the Leopard crew. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so grateful here at the Canadian Tank Museum that you have taken your time to come out here to Oshawa, enjoy this, a sellout crowd. Thank you so much. I'd like to give you an applause, okay? Like, put a lot of support for the Canadian Tank Museum, but the last thing I'll ask you to applaud is let's applaud the volunteers who put a show like this together. Nothing like anything else in this country. For the volunteers. So we hope you enjoy the rest of your time here at Tank Saturday Armageddon. Go down to the tank harbor, meet the crews, see the vehicles, get a ride in the M113, visit the gift shop, enjoy the rest of your day. Again, it's Jeremy signing off from the Canadian Tank Museum. I'll see you in 2026 here in the Tank Arena. Thank you very much.